Good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 p.m. on Monday, February 28th, 2022. My name is Amy Wiltsey, Finance Committee Chair. Welcome, everyone, back to Stratford High School. It's nice to be back in the auditorium. I will call this meeting to order and entertain a motion to start our evening with an acceptance of minutes from November 22nd, 2021.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. And is there any discussion? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote to accept the minutes from our meeting on November 22nd. Mr. David?
Aye.
Mr. Proto?
Aye.
Mrs. Lance?
Abstain, I wasn't on the committee.
Thank you. Ms. Corcoran?
Yes.
Ms. Fabian?
Yes.
Kristen Bedell?
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Henrik?
Aye.
Janice Cupie? And chair votes yes. Okay, next on our agenda, I will entertain a motion to move item 3B to 3A to discuss our 22-23 itemized estimate of expenditures. So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. Okay, so we have been through a series of budget workshops to talk about our anticipated budget for next year. And there has been great conversation and wonderful presentations. And I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion on the budget. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Dr. Sunday, the administration, this board for doing a great job with all those workshops and listening. The workshops were very in detail. The book that we got this year was excellent. About 20 years doing this, and I would say very good job. I'd give you an A-. There's always room for growth, but I'd give it an A. But in all, no, you guys did a great job. That being said, I'd like to make a motion. The budget right now this year is $120,184,338. I would like to make these proposed changes to the budget. I would like to reinstate the 2 full-time high school teachers at $157,740. I'd like to reinstate one of the enrichment teachers, a full-time position, at $80,000. I'd like to reduce by $270,000 the SPED tuition account. That is monies I believe will be replaced by the state of Connecticut in this coming year. Going forward with that, I would like to propose our new budget with Dr. Sunday's amendments and additions, which is in this book, the entirety, at $679,660. That's an increase of $5,495,322. The increase percentage is 4.57%. And I'd like to make that motion at this point.
Seconded.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to understand a little bit around the SPED tuition account. If whoever can offer that information and just what we're looking at there.
So, go ahead, thank you, Pam.
Okay. If you might recall, when we were discussing the SPED tuition with Ms. Borges, she had indicated that historically we always end up with more students than we currently budget for. While we have never actually accomplished having unanticipated placements because we are always struggling with the budget, we did have some further discussion about whether or not at some point in time, if we had to reduce that, would that be reasonable? And at some point in time, we kind of assumed it would be removed from the budget. We were hopeful because it is the best budget practice to do that. Nevertheless, I think we need to keep in mind that when we have increased students that are outplaced, we report that information to the state, and we do receive reimbursement for a percentage of that cost through the excess cost grant. Subsequently, there is a good chance, should we run into the problem that we're facing this year with many new students, next year, again, we should get an additional sum of money from the state for the excess cost grant. And it looks like this year we are going to be getting a significant amount more. So I really feel very comfortable that that will happen.
Thank you.
Mr. Hendrick?
Madam Chair, just for clarity, is this an amendment we're discussing? We don't have an original motion, so would this be amendment? Will be allowed to offer other amendments to the original?
Mr. David just offered the first.
I just offered this motion
A motion as,
for the budget for next year
is it,
that we're sending to the town council. Excuse me, that we are sending to the Board of Education with a favorable recommendation from this finance committee.
but this is an amendment to
No,
the
this is a
original?
motion, sir.
For the entire budget.
This is a motion for the budget.
Okay.
What was the amount again?
The amount was $125,679,660, which is a 4.57% increase, which is less than what the superintendent recommended, but I believe is a responsible budget sending over to the Board of Education at this time.
Pam, can you confirm that number is accurate?
With the reinstatement of the 2 high school teachers, reinstatement of the 1.0 enrichment teacher, and a $270,000 reduction in the SPED tuition account, that does bring you to a new total for a proposed budget for fiscal year '23 of $125,679,660, an increase of $5,495,322, or a 4.57% increase.
Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion on this motion?
Will this be on a final vote?
This would be our vote from the Finance Committee to send it to the board,
Okay.
and then at our board meeting, we would vote to send it to town.
Okay. So we'll have the chance to amend this motion either here or at the regular meeting. Is that correct?
The board would have to accept, you would be able to vote at the board meeting on accepting the Finance Committee's vote.
But also the opportunity to amend it at that point? If there's a motion, we'll have the opportunity to amend
It
it.
would be a motion.
You could always make a motion, on the board level, the 7 of you can make any decisions you want.
You could
This is
throw the
just
whole
really-
thing out.
You could you could increase it by 20% if you want, Mr. Henry.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Mike, what you're saying is, obviously, we're not members of the board, but there would be a motion at the board to approve the budget that this body sends to the board, and at that point, if you wanted to add or subtract, you could make those motions as you saw fit, whether it was one big motion or multiple motions, the same way you would do it when you did the council budgets.
Yeah, I mean, typically, just a little confused, typically we would make a motion to approve and then we would make a motion to amend, but I guess it's kind of same thing maybe, but.
Are there any other questions or discussion regarding the motion? Mrs. Adele?
Would now be the time for me to add 2 additional things I'd like to discuss, to add to that motion? Or amend that motion?
You'd like to make a motion to amend?
Yes. Can I do that now? Just making sure. I'd like to amend Mr. David's motion to add in the reduction of line 0595. There's 2 part-time CIA positions, one of which is not filled at the moment, totaling in the amount of $75,573.
Kristen, just again, what was that line number?
0595.
So that was the 500
Yes.
category?
500 carry.
Yeah.
It's page 20.
Page 20, thank you.
The first.
595, the health assistant?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And you wanted to reduce the entire line to 0, or?
Correct. It actually encompasses 2 part-time positions, Ben.
Okay.
And then the second item that I was reviewing is page 29, line 1150, the salary reserve line. I'd like to look at reducing and/or eliminating that entirely at the moment.
Madam Chair? She's an issue.
Mrs. Bedell, is there a second to Mrs. Bedell's motion to amend?
I'll second that.
Mr. Henrik? Okay, now open for discussion?
Yeah, just to Ms. Mangini or Dr. Sunday, can you explain the health assistant job and the salary reduction category once more to us?
Sure. I'll start off with the salary reserve
Okay.
account. That account represents contractual obligations. So it's funding that's set aside because we are currently in negotiations with a couple of our bargaining units, and that reflects the projected increase that we believe we will be liable for next year. It would not be best practice to put those numbers in the salary line because we kind of show our hand to the union as we're negotiating. It's not that difficult to calculate when it's individual. So by eliminating that, it will definitely be extremely problematic when we have to pay these employees based on their contract next year. So I would really caution you about reducing that line. With regard to the health assistants, I can tell you that they are the only support that our school nurses have in the nurse's office right now, and I believe they're not full-time. They might, I know their school year. Susan, I know you know more about this one than I do.
It's actually, the health assistance is actually a total of two
Can't hear you.
full-time FTEs and a .62 at Second Hill Lane. So they're CIAs, so they work school year, and they're paid hourly.
So they're full-time school year, and that represents a total of 2.62 FTEs in that line item.
That's correct.
Mr. Proto?
Kristen, just, I thought you had indicated, so I just want to make sure that these positions are currently budgeted but not filled.
One was, yes, correct. One is noted as a resigned position in this month's personnel report.
Okay. And just your logic in, and I don't necessarily think I may have a problem with eliminating the position that's not filled, but the logic in eliminating the positions that are filled.
Not all of the nurses have, not all of the buildings have a second nurse or a CIA or something to help in the nurse's office. I just think that it may not be as necessary as we deem it to be at this point. Go ahead.
Can I jump in? My one concern with that, and maybe Mrs. Borges can speak to that better, but my thought is there are some schools that have children with more complex health issues, and that's why the CIA is there, but I would leave that to.
I'm going to defer to Mrs. Borges.
I just think, before you make that decision, it's important for you guys to know and understand that at Second Hill Lane, students with exceptionalities is a population of 32% of that school. They also house the preschool program and they house the ABA program. That nurse's office is extremely busy and the help is definitely needed. Just with the preschool alone, the help with the amount of diaper changing and things that have to happen at Second Hill Lane is so much more than at the other elementary schools. So I would caution you, that one was the one that was just resigned this month, and the resignation came a lot in turn to the amount of work that's in that particular nurse's office. So that school houses a lot of things for us. And due to that, the amount of work in that office is pretty extreme. So I would caution that as you guys make your decisions.
Ms. Nicholson, did you have something to add? I saw your hand.
I just wanted to state that it's one FTE at each high school that helps the nurses at the high schools, which is obviously a lot larger. And I second what Mrs. Borges said. Second Hill Lane has
Can't hear you.
Second Hill Lane has a high population of students that need additional assistance.
I mean,
And this,
Mr. Brody.
so the high schools each have a full-time health assistant, and Second Hill Lane, which has an overbearing need for more than one, only has a 0.6, is that correct? And why are we scheduling in that way if we know that Second Hill has this overriding need?
That is not up to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the contextual historical background on that, but again, I would probably credit to the need, but more specifically, the type of need that exists in that building. So I would caution against this move just because when we start to talk about medical need, there's certain liabilities that are associated with those things. So we have to think about the needs of the kids, families' responses to these things. And again, I would just caution the board to consider those things before such recommendations are made.
Mr. Davis, did you have something?
Yes, as a parent who had a 3-year-old go through Second Hill Lane with a student of exceptionalities, I will tell you that nurse's office is probably one of the busiest in the town. To make any cuts to that nurse's office, I am 100% opposed. I think it is, in this situation, not prudent to cut it from this budget. So I won't be accepting that amendment on my motion on the health assistant at this point. And I could ask my second if she would accept it.
Yes.
Madam Chair, point of order, a motion was made to amend it. It's not up to him to accept it or not accept it. An amendment was
What's an
made.
amendment? It's an-
Excuse me, sir, I have the
Excuse me,
floor.
point of order.
Excuse me, sir, I have the
Point of
floor.
order.
We run this meeting by Robert's Rules of Order. I
Yes,
have the
we do.
floor. So as I was stating, a motion was made and seconded to a motion that was made by Mr. David. It's not a friendly amendment. It's a motion. It's an amendment that was made as a motion. So it's not up to him to accept or not accept. He can vote on it.
Madam Chair, I'd like to call the question.
No, listen.
You do that. You just call.
You can call the question.
Call the question.
You need a two-thirds vote to call the question. Read the Robert's Rules.
I defer to that. I believe you need a simple majority.
No, two-thirds vote to call the question.
It's 2/3. I looked it up today. So,
And why would, I'm sorry.
Withdraw the motion.
so we can vote to call.
I'll withdraw the motion.
2/3 vote. Okay.
But I would, as I
I just
did-
withdraw the motion.
I did have the floor, so I would appreciate the ability to speak and not be interrupted. But the motion was made. But part of the issue here is allocating resources, and I think what Ms. Bedell has not motioned, not maybe perhaps to eliminate a position at Second Hill Lane, but to reallocate some of the resources. When it comes time to make adjustments to the budget, the vast majority of our budget is personnel. So when we look at cuts to the budget or reductions that are possibly coming from the council as they oversee it, the really only place to make those reductions would be in personnel. And I think Ms. Bedell has done a good job of maybe looking at positions that are unfilled, giving the administration the opportunity to reallocate those resources in a way that are more effective and cost effective. But I would support her in her endeavor and appreciate her willingness to take a look at some of these options at this time. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. We have an amended motion. We shall vote on the
Wait,
amendment.
we're voting on the amendment.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, voting on the amendment.
Yep, so we're going to go first with voting on the amendment.
Are we going to discuss the salary reduction part of it too, or no?
Oh, was there more discussion after, thank you, after Ms. Mangini's explanation
Yeah,
of
I
salary
just-
reserve?
Did you? I don't want to cut that discussion off on the salary reduction.
Mr. Proto.
I was just going to ask Kristen if you would be willing to separate those two. I think the salary reserve is an important line as we go through contract negotiations. We know that the salaries are going to increase next year. We don't know by how much. I think the number that is represented is a realistic top end number. I don't think we'll exceed the roughly $295,000 based on just what I've been told for the negotiations. So I would prefer to keep that there, and then we can have the discussion on the health assistance. But my question is if you would be willing to break those into two motions
Sure.
for purposes, because I think the salary reserve is important as we move forward through through the negotiations, that we don't come up short once the contracts are finalized.
Sure.
Okay, were there questions regarding discussion of the salary reserve? Mr. Henry.
So the salary reserve, as I understand, is put in place for probable increases, but haven't those increases already been accommodated for in the budget?
Mrs. Mangini?
No, they have not. As I was explaining earlier, it's really a better practice to have a separate line for negotiation dollar amounts, and it's more than one union for a variety of reasons, but mostly because we don't want to show our hand as to what we are estimating will be a negotiation wage increase.
So what contracts are up for?
Right now, we're negotiating custodians, and I believe, Susan, you did confirm that we also put the salaries for the secretaries in that as well. The secretaries are pending ratification, which I believe will happen, and you will be approving that budget as a board, that contract as a board in March.
So secretaries, I think, are on page 24.
So when you look at their salaries, it's their current salaries without any increases.
Well, in the book, it says 2022 to 2023 proposed budget. Each of those line items increase from the adopted budget of 2021 and 2022. So to my point, is there not already an increase in those line items, since the vast majority of them seem to be increasing?
Susan, I'm certain that that's how we did that. I know that we were talking about the step increases, and there was movement, and that's what ends up happening throughout the year. There is movement of steps per the contract. In addition, we've had quite a few secretaries who have left and some who have changed positions. So I'm going to take another look at where you're looking so I can confirm that for you. With the overall increase of 5%, I am going to say at this point that is primarily a result of step movement, not GWI per the pending contract.
What page is that one on?
What's that?
The contractual, the
The
reserve, I'm sorry.
the reserve is on page 29.
20, thank you. The next three, 29.
Pam, was this, when we did this in the past, was this an amount that we normally put into contingency?
I don't know what you did in the past, quite honestly. I think the year, Susan could probably clarify that since she is our constant here.
In the past, the chief operating officer would give me a percentage for any union agreements that were still going to be in negotiation, and we factored that in to the individual lines. But this year, instead of factoring in 2%, we included that in the salary reserve. So in the past, we factored it in the individual lines based on an assumption of what we were going to propose.
So to be clear, what we're seeing is the steps and the increase for this year's proposed adopted budget, and the salary reserve is what is expected or anticipated at the end of contract negotiation.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or question, Mr. Henrik?
So are teachers also up for negotiations?
No, we have
No,
just
they
completed
already said
theirs.
Okay. So because, teachers, we have a 1.31% increase. Counselors, we have a 2.5% increase. So it just seems, I don't know. It doesn't seem like everything is being accounted for equally when we have a much higher increase on some of those positions that are up for negotiation. But then in addition, we need to put a reserve fund aside for those positions. So the math just doesn't seem to balance out. And most of the positions that aren't up for negotiation, the increases in the budget numbers are significantly less than the increase for the positions that are up for negotiation. And then in addition, we are also adding a contingency fund, so.
There is no contingency fund.
Well, the salary reserve would be a contingency fund of sorts.
Are there any other questions regarding salary reserve? Okay.
So, point of order, we're just going to vote on the health care first and then the salary reserve?
We are. The
Okay.
CIA positions, which total $75,573 at line item 0595, which is an amended motion from Mrs. Bedell. Her motion is to remove them from the projected budget. Mr. David?
No.
Mr. Proto?
Not the full amount. No.
Mrs. Lance?
No.
Mrs. Corcoran?
No.
Mrs. Fabian?
No.
Mrs. Bedell?
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Henrik?
Yes.
Mrs. Cupie?
No.
And chair votes no. Second amended motion is line item 1150, salary reserve, $294,025 on page 29, to be removed from projected budget. Mr. David?
No.
Mr. Proto?
No.
Mrs. Lance?
No.
Mrs. Corcoran?
No.
Mrs. Fabian?
No.
Mrs. Bedell?
No.
Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Henrik?
Yes.
Mrs. Cupie?
No.
And chair votes no. The next motion on the floor to be voted on is Mr. Bob David's projected budget of
Madam Chair?
4.5.
I did have some other amendments I'd like to discuss. So, line items 0774 and 0779, reducing the assistant principals, reducing both those positions to a half position.
Page
Page
number?
number?
That would be,
Page 4 and page, what was it, the lines, Mike? 774 and what?
that would be page number 4. Line item 0774 and 0769, reducing both those positions to a half position.
Are you making a motion?
I am.
Is there a second? Mr. Henrik has made a motion to eliminate the assistant principal positions at Lordship Elementary School and Chapel Elementary School, line items 0769 and 0774. Is there a second?
My motion was to reduce those to half positions.
Reduce them to half positions. Mrs. Mangini, would you mind giving us a total of what that would be if reduced to half?
Did you say 0779?
0774 and 0769.
69, that's why I can't find it, okay. Okay, so. And Mr. Henrik, you were requesting that to be a half-time, correct?
Yes.
I am going to take a slightly lower dollar amount in savings because this always results in bumping. So we will go with the lower of the two salaries as a potential savings, and that will be $112,555. I'm assuming this is in addition to the 3 other changes that are on the table currently, meaning reinstating 2 high school, reinstating the enrichment, and the reduction in the tuition account.
This is just a sole
This is
amendment.
Okay,
Sole
that's what
amendment.
I'm trying
So
to
sole
just
total.
get to. Okay. As a solo, this will bring us to a budget total of $125,599,365, or a 4.51% increase.
And the total
Thank you.
amount, Pam, that you used to, was the 119,621, or?
I used 112,555,
Thank
and
you.
quite frankly, it might even be less than that in savings.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Okay, motion fails. We are going to, are there any other motions for amendment to the budget? Okay, we are going to now move forward to Mr. David's original motion to present to the Board of Education a 22-23 budget total of $125,679,660, which is an increase of 4.57%. Mr. David,
Yes.
Mr. Proto,
Yes.
Mrs. Lance,
Yes.
Mrs. Corcoran,
Yes.
Mrs. Fabian,
Yes.
Mrs. Bedell,
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy,
Yes.
Mr. Henrik,
No.
Mrs. Cupie,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, the next agenda item we have, Mrs. Mangini, is budget transfers.
Correct. You do have budget transfers that were provided to you, and I bring your attention specifically to the area that reflects the amount based on the salary savings that we are requesting as part of this budget transfer to transfer to the salary reserve account. You know there is already almost a little over $400,000 in that account, and this will add another $430,275. It's on the last page. It's the last entry of the transfers. I give total credit to Mrs. Nicholson. She does a complete analysis on a regular basis. I know that we were asked at one of the previous workshops for the open position report, and due to unfilled positions this year, we have had significant savings, which thankfully will offset some of our concern with our deficit. Nevertheless, as you will probably recall, on every report I give you, I do remind you that some of these savings are a result of teachers on leaves of absence, paid leaves of absence that we are hiring substitutes for, and in other positions that we simply can't do without, we're also hiring substitutes. So of course, we're monitoring that substitute account very carefully as we move along. So while I hope most of that balance, as we add this amount to it, will be available to us to offset our deficit, we need to proceed cautiously over the next few months.
Are there questions for Mrs. Mangini?
Yes.
Yes. Mrs. Lance?
Could you tell me what EE stands for?
Employee,
Oh, thank you, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that.
no problem.
Madam Chair, just to clarify for myself, so that account, so there will be $800,000 in that account after this transfer, and that could be used to cover deficits in other areas if necessary at the end of the year.
Absolutely, and
Okay.
we may bring another transfer to you next month, at least to cover the transportation and perhaps one other area that we are currently in deficit in.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mrs. Mangini? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. Proto.
Pam, just on the salary reserve that we're moving the transferring the funds over to, that is a new account this year
No, we started that last year.
in the 21-22 budget.
Correct.
But-
Did we have that in 2021, Susan?
Well,
I feel
because
like we did.
because when I look at, just to follow up on where we were earlier, the 21-22 adopted budget shows no amount for salary reserves. So
You-
did we not budget anything in 21-22 for
You
salary
normally-
reserves?
I'm sorry, yes, you normally would not have a budget in there. Some years you will, but we just started it last year, and our reason for no budget was we weren't pending any of the contract negotiations at that time.
So for 21-22, we budgeted no money for salary reserves, but now we're transferring money into the salary reserve for 21-22 of about $850,000.
We are.
At the moment.
And that's really for transparency. We want to
Okay.
be very clear to the board as well as ourselves, the money that's available.
Thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion for the budget transfers.
Us-
Second by Mrs. Mangini.
Yeah, so moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, we will move to vote. Mr. Proto?
Yes.
Mr. David?
Yes.
Mrs. Lance?
Yes.
Mrs. Coopey?
Yes.
Mrs. Corcoran?
Yes.
Mrs. Fabian?
Yes.
Mrs. Bedell?
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Henrik?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Mrs. Mangini, next.
I think you have the proposed capital plan for approval this evening as well. I know we went through it a bit at the workshop, so if there's any questions, we're happy to entertain them.
We got that at the last meeting, right, Pam?
Correct.
This is just for discussion. Are there any questions with regard to the capital plan presented by Mrs. Mangini at our last workshop? Okay. Then it will bring us to 3D.
In your packets, you did receive the financial report. And of course, just as a reminder, this is reflective as of January 31st. And at that point in time, we were projecting a year-end balance of a negative $1,054,733. I did in fact adjust for your pending transfer, just so that it wouldn't look quite so bad. So you do have in salaries a projected balance of $892,667, which is the salary reserve account balance after the transfer you approved this evening. Just a couple of things worth noting is the unemployment account is actually trending towards a year-end balance. That's some good news. We had the American Rescue Plan credit, which was helpful for part of the year. And we continue to monitor our clinical costs and professional services accounts, as well as our tuition accounts. The other account that we're watching very carefully is our workers' compensation account. It does seem to be trending very high this year, and we are a little bit concerned about that. We are currently projecting a deficit in that account as the trend continues. So we will keep you up to date on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
Yes, Mr. Proto.
Just a quick question on the purchase services deficit of 1.6 million at the moment, the projected balance. Is that balance projected on the current number of special ed students that we have, or has the administration built in some increase between now and the end of the year, since we seem to be increasing on almost a monthly basis?
All financial reports are based on actual data, so no, there are no anticipated expenses, and these numbers are actually based on the purchase orders that we have approved and covered for students currently.
So if we, between now and the end of June, add additional students into the special ed program, that number could go up?
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions for Mrs. Mangini on her finance report? Okay. Expenditures and encumbrances, grants update. Ready, Dr. Cody? Thank you.
Good evening. It's been a while since I've spoken to you. We have some new members here, so welcome. I'm Kevin Clemmy. I'm the grants administrator for the district, and I'll try to keep this quick. It's, like I said, it's been a little while, so I'll start by reminding everybody you've got a grants report in your packet. At the moment, we have just over $27 million in grants under management. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that over half of that amount is ESSER and related grants that are to be spent over the next 2 to 3 years, not all for this year's budget. We have to parse that out and make it last through 23-24 if it's the American Rescue Plan dollars, through 22-23 if it's the ESSER 2 dollars. We have 7 new grants, listed here in this month's report. Truly new grants, the American Rescue Plan IDEA grant, the American Rescue Plan IDEA preschool grant, and the ESSER 2 special education recovery grant. All of those go toward dealing with the special ed students in the district, and they are mostly for personnel when we're referring to ARP IDEA and ESSER 2 special ed recovery to work with our special education students. The one for the preschool is for classroom supplies and other equipment that's being used to refurbish and build up the classrooms at Second Hill Lane with better equipment and renewed equipment. We have 4 grants that are renewed grants. We get them every year or every 2 years. They're Title I, Title II, Title IV, and Perkins. All came in since I spoke to you last with approval from the state. We have 1 grant, not even really a grant, we have 1 project in progress that's on this sheet. On March 15th is the deadline for doing our final revision to this year's adult education grant. We're working on that. We have 2 grants up at the state that we're waiting for responses to. One is the American Rescue Plan After School Grant, and one is the American Rescue Plan Grant for Homeless Children and Youth. And we have submitted applications for those, and we're waiting to hear back. And one last note, there's an addition to this month's report, in part because we had so many new members coming on board. So for the big 3 COVID-related grants, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and American Rescue Plan ESSER, we included a summary of how those grants have been allocated and what we expect to spend them on over the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you very much for that detailed report.
And a
Are there
question?
any questions for Dr. Fleming?
So of the COVID-related grants, I looked through it before, but what's the dollar amount for currently being used for salaries?
So it's off the top of my, I'm going to have to do this off the top of my head. It's $2 million out of ESSER 2 right now, and no full salaries are in ESSER 1. And then ARP ESSER includes $4 million for salaries in 22-23 and 23-24.
Okay, so we have about $6 million worth of granted salary grants that will expire in 2 years?
In 2 to 3 years, yeah.
2 to 3 years, so, it is...
But it's $2 million per year. It's the same people all 3 years.
Yeah, and is there any thought that there might be other grants that will become available to replace those grants so that we don't need to eliminate those positions?
At this point, there is no indication of that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a simple little question. And maybe it's a question for both you and Pam. So some time ago, we talked about our district changing how the data that is used for free and reduced lunch versus filling out applications. And it just made me think, as you were going through the grant report for Title I, do we have to fill out any kind of forms, our families, I should say, in order for us to qualify? And the reason I'm thinking of it is because we had gotten to a place where they were using different data to identify our students. And I'm just curious if we're not filling out an application, if that was impacting our qualifications for any Title I funding at all.
So that would come into play roughly November, December, when the Title I application is due.
Okay.
And I do not have numbers yet on the number of free and reduced applications, but there are 2 ways that you qualify a school for Title I.
Mm-hmm.
Either you use the percentage of the free and reduced lunch families,
Okay.
or you use the community eligibility provision, CEP data,
Okay.
which is a formula based on students who receive free and reduced lunch for reasons other than those applications. So for instance, DSS students, things like that. And we did have to use the CEP last year because during the COVID period, with free lunches being provided, many families chose not to fill out their applications.
Okay. Do you see that being a potential issue this year in terms of the data that we're going to be using for eligibility for those grants?
I don't at the moment.
Okay, good.
Because we can always go back and forth and use whichever one works better for us. And so if we don't have sufficient free and reduced lunch applications, we'd fall back on the CEP formula.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I know that, yes?
Yeah, just a quick question, because I haven't heard this in a while. Title I schools at this point in Stratford, all of them, they're all,
Including Chapel.
Including Chapel. There are two categories of Title I schools. There's what's called targeted assistance, which is 35% to 40%, and then at 40% you can go school-wide and help all students, okay? Chapel, and we have two schools that are technically Chapel and, I want to say Whitney, that are between 35 and 40, but we're treating all of our schools as school-wide because you can apply for a waiver, and because all the other schools were school-wide, the state allowed us to treat all of our schools school-wide.
So because of that, as I recall, we provide all of our students with free breakfast and lunch.
So that's not part of Title I. Title I is staff, supplies, professional development, working with students who are low income or have other challenges or obstacles to academic success. And the difference is, if you're at the 35% level, you must identify who those students are and use Title I funds only for them. Since we're all school-wide, we can use it for any student in the school.
just a follow-up question. So Title I tutors, we can distribute through the entire district at this point then?
That's correct. Each school has an assigned number of Title I tutors, or in the case of the secondary schools, they get extra social work.
And is this the first year all of our schools are Title I, or?
Second.
Second, okay.
Could I ask a follow-up? So I'm just curious, how would the board know who those Title I funds are being used for, if we're at a stage now where it can be used for any child? And again, I'm looking at this from an equity lens, making sure that the kids who absolutely need it, it's going there first. You know, I understand there are some things that can be funded through that, those dollars that apply universally, right? To maybe every student at a particular school or district-wide, whatever. But I'm just curious, how are we making sure we're concentrating those funds on the original students that they were designated for?
So the Title I formula for distributing funds between the schools or at the district level is pretty complex, and it's not simply a per student amount where every student gets the same amount allocated to them. The schools that have the highest poverty rate have to also get the most money per student. Okay. So it takes a big spreadsheet to figure it all out and make all the numbers add up. What we do is allocate the funds to the schools based on that formula, and the state approves that, and then it's up to the administration at the schools or the district leadership for district-wide funds that we use to determine how those are used.
The spirit of the grant is anchored in economic equity.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
The spirit of the grant is anchored in economic equity.
Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Clemmie? Mr. Henry?
Just future grants, have we looked at capital improvement type grants that may or may not be out there?
We do.
And are there grants available or grants that will become available in the near future that we can access?
So there are grants through the state that work with capital projects, up to and including roofing schools and things like that. Those are available through the state. It's distributed based on need and formula. I'm not aware of any new ones that are going to come out, other than renewing the ones from past years. And things like Title I, Title II, Title IV, those cannot be used for capital projects. They are meant to serve the students directly. The only source of capital funds that's unusual that I can think of right now is the American Rescue Plan ESSER, and our spending plan allocated 10% of that grant to capital projects.
And I would just probably add, I think it's important to recognize the fact that we do work closely with the town. So whenever they hear of an opportunity, or we do, we share the information and we do move forward.
I know we've just recently received the capital improvement plan. I didn't know if there was any grants that might help us reach some of those goals.
Not outside the norm that's available.
I have one follow-up question to grants, if that's okay. I know we're running short on time for our board meeting, and I apologize. Because we have 4 new members here, I wonder, Dr. Clemmie, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit of the criteria that went into ESSER funds. You know, there's a lot of confusion in the community that we just got a lot of money and it went to our bottom line. Can you just really educate even the public about the buckets of opportunity that we had to apply for and had to be very specific in the spending of?
Sure. So on the one hand, ESSER's pretty flexible in the sense that they gave us 13 or 14, depending on which grant you're talking about, different buckets into which we can place funds. So that includes staff, it includes professional development, supplies, whether they're instructional supplies or PPE. So they were very flexible in how you use the funds. The catch is you have to use them for something COVID related or recovery related from COVID. So it doesn't have to be all PPE because that's the obvious most direct response to COVID. But if we're going to offer, say, a student program like our after-school tutoring program, we must be able to determine that the tutoring that's being done is designed to help students recover from learning loss during COVID. We can't just say, oh, well, here's our favorite PD project, we'll fund it out of ESSER. We can't just say, oh, we've got this bureaucratic need with the state, we'll fund somebody to do that out of ESSER. It's got to be COVID related, either recompense for costs that the district absorbed during COVID to continue operation, or funding for helping students recover from their learning loss during COVID, or adapt to returning to school, going out of school, remote hybrid in school. You can use it for, you know, for instance, for student trauma or for student difficulties making those adjustments or who learn better in one environment than the other.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more question.
Is that a quick question on that? So I think if I remember correctly, we had hired a new administrator, health diversity administrator through ESSER funds, I think.
And Art Besser, yes.
Yeah. And so how is that categorized as COVID related?
So I'm going to ask Dr. Sunday to speak about that in some way because that was a project that came out of his office. But I will simply respond that part of COVID and the return to school from COVID is making sure that students who have been out for 1 year to 2 years from different cultures with different languages can come back together and learn together in a safe and secure environment. And we have had instances of students not coming back together well, students who've struggled to return to school and mix again with students from other cultures. And it's important to have programs in place that allow that return to school and that recreating of a school community after 1 year or 2 away to happen.
I think you captured it spot on. There is a component to this that's SEL, and you know, there is a prevailing school of thought that.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, Dr. Sunday, keep
You having a hard time hearing? There's a component of this process that's anchored in SEL, specifically the ESSER grant, and there's a prevailing school of thought that recognizes the fact that part of SEL is school connectedness and school belongingness. And we do understand that COVID, the pandemic, disproportionately had an impact across the entire community in different ways. So beyond the fact that there's a possibility to enact some diversity and equity pieces, we're really focused on the inclusion piece, which is broad and cross-cutting across different subgroups.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one more question for you, Dr. Clemmie. In the grants that we're targeting or going after for our district, are we looking at arts and music type grants to fund some of these programs?
Sure.
That we know are so helpful.
Yeah,
to our
Yes, we are.
students.
And in
Okay.
fact, Dr. Frazier has used ESSER funds to purchase things that allowed the students to continue in band and art classes during the pandemic and after they returned to school. There are funds in the American Rescue Plan ESSER for enrichment activities after school that can include art, music, or things beyond that. So yes, there are funds in those grants to support outside the basic literacy, numeracy, and STEM.
Thank you.
So, if I may, maybe speak a little bit on grants. You know, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about district work with grants is, you know, whenever you have opportunities to seek grants, if it makes sense, go after it. Because the unique attribute of our grants is that at some point in time, they exhaust. And when they exhaust and you cannot continue to provide programs or those resources, then it puts the burden back on the board or the district or community to absorb those things. So, you know, more than the fact that we want to go out there and research grants, we have to be intentional to make sure it's positioning us to support the operating budget and move the needle for kids. Because once those resources exhaust, then harder, more complex conversations emerge.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to special ed report.
Good evening, you guys. Thank you, and just, you have the report in front of you. I'm happy to answer any questions. Know that myself and my team are tracking everything daily to meet the needs of our students with exceptionalities, as well as to stay ahead of new students moving in and students being identified and making sure that we are providing the appropriate resources for everybody. So if you have any specific questions on the budget, but Ms. Mangini already touched on the 2 areas in which we are in deficit, but I'm happy to answer anything else that you have.
Are there any questions? Okay. Did you have one, Mr. Jordan?
Well, just, Heather, not the best at math. Math coach would be helpful, please. Based on your narrative, there's 1,322 students with exceptionalities in the district. If I take the enrollment of the 7419, so we're looking at roughly 18% of our population is our students with exceptionalities.
Yes, just keep in mind, in my office, we service students that are at parochials, we service students that are at magnet, we even service students that are homeschooled. If you have an IEP, it's our job to continue to provide you services. So when you think of that number, it's probably more around 16% of the students that are actually in our buildings.
In our building.
Okay? And yes, that many that we are servicing elsewhere.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Food services report.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to be short and sweet. It's a really nice report. If you look at our pending reimbursements, which are actually over $1 million, less the ending fund balance, because this is on a cash basis, we are really trending well this year and currently projecting a $600,000 year-end balance at this point. So finally, we are getting to where we need to be.
Are there any questions regarding food services?
You did a golf class, that's good. Service.
Okay, enrollment?
And you do have the enrollment reports in your packets. If anyone has any questions, we are happy to address them.
Are there any questions regarding enrollment? Okay, any items for other business? All right, wonderful, thank you all.
Motion to adjourn?
Okay, motion to adjourn made by Mr. Davis, seconded by Mrs. Lance at 7:29. Thank you, everyone.